Welcome to the Sleep Dives channel. We're diving into Flow Engineering by Steve Pereira, and we're going to tackle a really interesting puzzle. It's this central paradox of how the very growth that tells us we're succeeding can end up creating this crippling complexity, and why, even with all our effort, it so often feels like we're just moving backwards.
Okay, so let's start right here. This quote from physicist Geoffrey West really sets the stage for everything we're going to talk about. See, the challenges we face when organizations grow, they aren't just about more people or more projects. At their heart, what we're really dealing with is a complex adaptive system, a place where everything is interconnected, and even tiny changes can have these massive, totally unpredictable effects. And that leads us straight into this paradox of scale. I mean, we chase growth because we want to be more powerful, more efficient, more capable, right? But for so many of us actually working inside these huge companies, that growth just feels like friction and delay and confusion. It's almost like the bigger we get, the harder it is to get anything important done.
But let's just take a step back and remember why we even scale in the first place. You know, as Peter Drucker said, it's about letting ordinary people do extraordinary things. Think about it. No one person can build a satellite or run a global bank on their own. We create these organizations to tackle challenges that are way beyond what any single individual could handle.
And this is where you can really see that core tension laid out. On one side, you've got the promise. Research actually suggests that organizations get about a 10% efficiency boost every time they double in size. That's the magic of economies of scale. But then there's the other side of the coin, the pain. This tangled web of dependencies, both digital and human, this fractured understanding across all the different teams, and just the exponential growth of waste and delay that sneaks in with it.
The book puts it so well. We've become victims of our own success. It feels like we're caught in this hurricane of distraction, where just the sheer amount of communication, data, and competing priorities makes it almost impossible to focus on what actually matters. The very systems we built to be successful are now tying us up in knots.
And look, this isn't just some vague, abstract frustration. It has a staggering, real-world cost. Pereira shares this wild example. A company spent $28 million in a full year just to add one new option to their billing system. Now, that's not a failure of the people or their talent. That's a failure of the system. It's a direct tax that gets imposed by unmanaged complexity.
So that $28 million price tag, it's not just a number. It's a symptom. It's what happens when an organization starts to lose the very things that make it effective in the first place. And according to Pereira, we can understand this loss by looking at three critical elements, what he calls the elusive trio: value, clarity, and flow.
First up is value. The big idea here is that real value isn't some internal metric or a number for investors. It's a shared, laser-like focus on the customer. But what happens is, as organizations get bigger, they tend to turn inward. They get more obsessed with navigating their own internal politics than with solving actual problems for the people they serve.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. The org chart is probably the one document that's always kept up to date in a big company. It shows who has power, who reports to whom, all the internal stuff. But as Pereira points out, the single most important person, the customer, is nowhere to be found on it.
The second thing we lose is clarity. You see, you just can't have effective teamwork without a shared map. But in most large companies, it's like everyone is looking at a different torn piece of that map. The information is scattered across thousands of documents, spreadsheets, slide decks, making a truly shared understanding practically impossible.
And that brings us to the third one, flow. The fundamental idea here is that value only gets delivered when work is actually moving. But as we grow, we specialize. We build these silos. And these silos create walls and handoffs that act like dams in a river, just stopping the work dead in its tracks. The work gets stuck in the white space between the boxes on the org chart. So if all these problems are so obvious, right, why is it so incredibly hard to fix them? Why do we stay stuck in these patterns of delay and frustration? Well, it turns out the system itself has these powerful hidden forces, deep-seated incentives and habits that are actively working against any real progress. They maintain the status quo, even when it's dysfunctional. So what are these hidden forces? Well, here are some of the most common traps. You've got these huge transformation initiatives that just end up being rebranding exercises with no real change. When things get messy, our default reaction is to add more meetings, more processes, which just adds more complexity. The org chart itself encourages people to climb the ladder, not to work together to deliver value. And maybe most importantly, If there's no psychological safety, people just won't risk sharing the new ideas that could actually fix things.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time diagnosing the problem, but how do we actually start to fix it? The key, according to Pereira, is to stop talking about it in abstract terms and to start making the invisible work visible. And it begins with a really simple, practical step.
Here's how you can start. First, just map out a single simple workflow that you're a part of. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, don't focus on the busy work. Look for the delays, the waiting periods, the handoffs. Where does the work get stuck? And third, when you find one of those delays, use the 5 whys technique. Just keep asking why until you dig past the symptoms and get to the real root cause.
Now, the mindset you bring to this is everything. This is not about finding someone to blame for the delays. It is always, always about understanding the system that creates those delays in the first place. The friction is a feature of the system, not a failure of the people who are working inside it.
So ultimately, what this all comes down to is this. To escape this paradox of scale, we can't just work harder or pile on more process. We have to relentlessly, intentionally chase a shared clarity on what actually provides value to our customers, and then we have to consciously engineer the systems that allow that value to flow.
And that leaves us with a final thought to take away with you. As you go about your day, just look at the systems around you and ask yourself this one simple question. Where is the biggest block? Where does the work stop? Because just identifying that one spot, well, that's the first real step to bringing flow back into your work.